by going through Matthew 22:15 through 22 with us.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to read and we're going to discuss just briefly. He said I have 2 minutes, so that's all I'm going to give you. So anyway, Matthew 22:15 says, "Then the Pharisees went and phoned and plotted together how they might trap him in what he said. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you are faithful and teach the way of God in truth and defer to no one, for you are not partial to anyone. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?'" The question there is, who are the Pharisees? They were the religious leaders of that time, right? And they hated Rome because of their that they taxed them, and all the things that they had that all the money that they took went to things that they didn't really appreciate. The Herodians were on the opposite side of the fence. So we've got two opposing forces here that are working to try to trick Jesus. But let's not talk about that so much. Let's talk about us. I'm going to compare us to the Pharisees. Now don't be offended by that. Because in those days the Pharisees hated giving money to Rome because of all the things that it represented and all the things that it was done. What's your attitude towards giving money to our government to support Planned Parenthood? Does that float your boat? Probably not a whole lot. Do you know that in the proposal that they're working on now, that there's a proposal to give illegal aliens that were separated from their folks $450,000 a person? What does that do for you? Does that get you excited to know that your taxpayer dollars are being used in that way? And so I think a lot of times we in our minds we're going, I hate this, I don't like this because I don't support abortion. And yet our government is giving money to people that do. And so there's an attitude problem there, that we have. And they had that same problem. And so they weren't coming to Jesus to find out what they were supposed to do. They came to Jesus to try to trick him, to get him to go one way or the other. But he has a very good answer, and that's kind of where we're headed today. Okay, so let's read his answer, and then we'll give it back to Mr. Bissinger. He said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius, which was the pay for a day, basically. And he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And that's what we need to do, right? If we have to pay taxes, that's what we need to do. But the main thing is that we need to render to God the things that are due him. And that's the important thing that we need to remember. So, there you are.
So does anybody else have thoughts about that? Do you like giving your money to the IRS? No, we don't, but we're challenged to do so. Let me give you a disclaimer about my role here today so you understand where I come from on all of this. For years, I operated in the financial planning industry, and early in my career, one of the things that I was counseled on was that, you need to think of yourself as the quarterback on a football team. And when you do that, you surround yourself with good people that are able to help you communicate with the clients that you're going to help. Thus, go out and find an attorney firm and go out and find an accountant or two that you can work with so that when you're counseling with the people that you're working with, that you can send them to get the expert advice that they need, which was a great example for me in not relying totally on myself to provide information, because I am not a lawyer and nor am I an accountant. Both of those fields I used in this case extensively in my practice as a financial planner. So What Larry read was very, very important. And one of the things that I want you to understand as I teach is that if you have questions, if you're too shy to ask the questions, write them down and give them to me. And if I don't know the answer to your question, I'm going to say I don't know the answer, but I will find out. And that's important to you because I don't have all the expertise that you might need in planning your estate. Now, to give you an idea of what we're going to do, today we're going to start with some of the simpler things in estate planning. And then the next time that I'm up here, we'll go into some more detail and more in-depth things. So today is going to be more around wills, simple wills, and complex wills. We'll get into the Irrevocable Living Trust a little bit later on down the line, and we'll talk about the things that you need to be aware of and why you would need to be in an irrevocable or a revocable living trust. So today is going to be basics, and then we'll go on from there. I'm also going to spend some time talking about taxes and how to best utilize your money in a way that is first and foremost legal, and second, help you to determine how to use your money in the best way possible. And as Larry talked about, giving it to God. And there are some unique things that have come out recently that President Trump brought out that you'll find interesting, especially if you're over the age of 70, and I think there might be a few of us in the room that meet that criteria. So again, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and if you're uncomfortable asking the question and you want privacy issues, I'd be happy to try and answer those if you submit those to me. So let's talk first and foremost, spend a little time talking about the three branches of our state and federal government. What are those three branches? Who can tell me what the three branches are of our state and federal government? Executive, judicial, and legislative. And there is a fourth branch that most people don't recognize, and this is what causes us a lot of problems. And the fourth branch is called the administrative branch, or the bureaucracy. Now, who can give me some examples of the fourth branch of government? What would you suspect that they are? The IRS is one of them. O&B. The intelligence community. How about the Department of Motor Vehicles? That's one we all love, isn't it? Have you stood in line recently? Trying to get your new driver's license, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these, the Department of Treasury, which runs the IRS, get their rules and regulations from where? They get them from our politicians, and then they are charged with the responsibility of carrying out those rules and regulations. Are those complex? They are, aren't they? Do you understand them? If you do, you should be teaching this class because I don't understand them. They are so complex that you can't make your way through those, and that's where many people get caught up in the problems with their income taxes and also estate planning. So I'm going to ask you an important question now, and I want you to think about this, and I'd like to get several responses from you on this question. Well, let's suppose that a good friend of yours shows up at your front door and hands you a briefcase and says, "This is a free gift." And you open this briefcase, and in this briefcase is $2 million. What kind of thoughts do you have about getting a briefcase of $2 million?
Have you filled out the 810 gift tax return?
Well, probably not. But you probably should. Anything else? You got $2 million. What's your first thought?
What's the gimmick?
What's the gimmick? Okay. What else? What do you do with it? Okay. Well, you take it, and I've had one person respond, yeah, I take it directly to my bank. But your scenario is, as you go through this $2 million, you find a note in it, and it says, this is bad money. Now what do you do? Take it to the police, the FBI? You see, one of the things that I'm doing with this illustration is this. Money does not have a personality. There's no such thing as precious money, good money, bad money, drug money. That's a description of the money, isn't it? How money is used is based on who actually has the money in their possession. And that's critical in our explanation of this whole process that we're going to go through. How the money that you have in your possession is actually a reflection of who you are personally. So using it wisely to take care of your family, to enhance your church, your community, and to make sure in this instance that you're taking care of yourself properly. One of the things that I learned from a money evangelist by the name of Ron Blue is, he said, what is the best way to take care of the poor? Anybody know what the answer to that is? Don't be poor yourself. So your scenario in this instance, he talked extensively about work ethic and how you use money, but not being poor enables you to take care of the poor in this instance that can't take care of themselves because of circumstances, possibly mental illness, and many other things that they have going on in their life. So remember that. First and foremost, the money that you have takes on your personality, how you utilize it, how you spend it. All right? Which, in this case, in the environment that we're in at this point in time, I have counseled many, many people that have debt problems. And again, it was because they didn't know how to handle credit. They didn't know how to get themselves out of financial problem through proper spending. And it's a very simple process to help people get out of debt. Number one, they develop a budget. And then number two, they start to take a look at their debt structure. And just a simple process called snowballing will help them get out of debt. And this is something that you can do with your own family if you see people mismanaging money. You can help your brothers or your sisters, or you can help your children understand the value of money, and this is how you handle money to make sure you don't end up in that position where you might be claiming bankruptcy because you can't take care of the debt. So that's a simple process. So remember that. And my goal here is to help you in this instance understand how estate planning and how wise tax planning can help you in that process of managing your money and being in a position that you're really going to help yourself and your family and give back to God in the manner that you should. All right, what constitutes an estate? What constitutes an estate? If you own anything, it constitutes an estate. And that might be a 16-year-old that buys their first car and it's decided that the title's going to be in their name only. They now have an estate. And if they're wise, their parents' name will be on that title with them. Anything that has a deed or a title in this instance constitutes having an estate. Also, the ownership of life insurance constitutes having an estate. It passes a little bit different, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So, anybody here under the age of 20? So, you have an estate yet? Do you own anything? Have you established a savings account for yourself? You have an estate. It's not a very big one, and you wouldn't have to worry about a whole lot of things today, but you do have an estate. And a lot of kids don't realize that. So the next part of this is what we call dying intestate or intestacy. And this is an important conversation to have. Without a will, the state has one for you. Absolutely makes no attempt to minimize taxes to the state or federal government. The courts have the right to appoint an executor or administrator to take care of your estate. And when the courts get involved in your estate, what happens? Costs go up, all right? They go up exponentially. Normally, a close family member and attorney who might be related in some ways are the heirs, or are the heirs, is appointed as your executor. And if the court doesn't feel that they're competent in this particular instance, they'll appoint one for you. And that, in this case, can do a lot of different things because it's going to cost money for the court to appoint one for you. Now, there's another thing that's important at this point in time to give you as well. Does anybody in here know anybody that does not have any heirs? It's a common problem that we run into. And there's a thing called escheat or escheatment. Write that down. It's E-S-C-H-E-A-T. Or escheatment. That's dying without heirs. Now, basically what takes place in this instance, if you have an estate and you die without heirs, after a period of time, and I'm going to give you, I think it's a 3-year or 4-year period of time, who gets the money from your estate? The state. They take the money. And I've ran into this a couple of times in my career over the last 40 years, is I have no heirs. Who would I leave the money to? And so we start asking questions. Who's your favorite charity? Which church do you go to? And do the best job that we possibly can in trying to give this money to a charity or a church rather than the state of Oregon. Who's best going to use the money to further God's kingdom? So if you know somebody in this instance that does not have an heir, you now have a way to really help them by saying, think about this, here are some things that you can do. And there's all sorts of things that they can do. In fact, one of the things I'll bring up right now is what's called a charitable gift annuity. It's called a CRAT, Charitable Remainder Annuity Trust. And so essentially what happens there is they give their money to a charity and or a church in exchange for a lifetime income. And then at the end of their life, there is a retention amount that the church or charity will keep. And typically, I'll just give you an example. If you had $500,000 that was to come to Stanfield Baptist Church, essentially what would take place in this instance, they would get a monthly income of about $800 a month for as long as they lived. And when they did pass away, then the retained amount would probably be $50,000 that would come to the church. And of course, they get tax write-offs for doing this. And there's another one called a CRUT, a Charitable Remainder Unit Trust. And the difference between the two is that they use mutual funds or a stock portfolio instead of a fixed annuity through an insurance company. How many people know what an annuity is? Okay. The annuity is something that we'll get into more at a later date, but I'll explain exactly what that is. Now, if you do suspect in this particular case that you know somebody in this position that has no heirs, by all means, advise them, hey, you can do something to help a charity or church. The other thing is, if you suspect that you have unclaimed money with the state, there is a place that you can go. There's a website. It's called Unclaimed Property in the state of Oregon. And if you go to that website, what will happen is you might find out that you didn't get your Umatilla Electric dividend 6 years ago or 2 years ago, and it might be in the amount of $35 or something like that. And that's one of the things that's available to you. So by all means, go to that unclaimed property site and determine if there's money out there that you've not received. You may have had a great uncle that you didn't know about that died recently, and all of a sudden your name shows up for $1 million estate. You can claim it. And I hope you do, because then you'll know what to do with some of that money. So that's there, and by all means, I would encourage you to look at that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about dying in state or intestacy. The other thing that this could trigger, especially if you have minor children, are guardianship issues or what's called conservatorship issues. And so I'll give you another example. Several years ago, a football coach from Pendleton was driving home from a skiing outing, coming back from Tollgate. And as he was coming back from Tollgate, a tree fell, and it was timed perfectly, and both him and his wife were killed. But they had an infant son that was sitting between them in his car seat. And the tree killed both of them, but the son, in this particular case, survived. So essentially what took place is, because he had no will, and he had life insurance in this instance, and it named his minor child as a contingent beneficiary. In the state of Oregon, any proceeds that come to a minor, be it from life insurance, be it from assets and held in other places, cannot be passed along, in this case, to children unless it's done under a conservatorship. Now, to serve as a conservator, and Don and I have personal experience. Years ago, we were taking care of her mother who had Alzheimer's disease. And we had, in this instance, worked with her father saying, do you have a will? And with that will, do you have a durable power of attorney? Can I please see it? Can I please see it? He never did show it to us. She came down with Alzheimer's disease. We had no durable power of attorney. And we'll talk more about those in a few minutes. Well, what happened in this instance, for us to take control of all of her financial dealings, we had to file for a conservatorship. And I volunteered Dawn to take care of that, of course. And she did a very good job at taking care of it. But the conservatorship has about 20 different items that you have to actually do for somebody that you're working for. In addition to that, on an annual basis, she had to report to the court. And the court in this instance would say, no, you don't have enough information, nor do you in this instance have the last tax return that she filed, and here's the expenses. And so it becomes an arduous task to do that. So, you know, the will in this case helps in a lot of these instances, because in the first case that I mentioned with the football coach and his wife that died in the accident, that conservatorship came on board. The young child, the monies were held in this instance in an account for him until he reached the age of 18. And somebody had to take care of that. Now, they also had to find a guardian for this young child. So I think one of the things that I might say to you is, if you have young children, this will becomes important. And we'll get deeper into that. If you have children that are under the age of 18, the will becomes important. But I would also say to you that if they're over 18, it becomes important, and I'll give you an example of that. And this took place way back in the early 80s. I had taught these kids, one time I was a school teacher, and I'd taught these kids in school, and their parents had gone on a fishing trip to Alaska and was killed, both the parents were killed in a plane accident. There was about $250,000 that came to these three kids, and they split it equally. And so they had a little over, as I recollect, $70,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. The youngest one had just turned 18. And the next two were like 23 and 25. So I helped with that. I delivered the money to these three kids. And what do you think took place with that money? The longest it lasted was 7 months. So they had new cars, fancy clothes. One of them had a drinking problem. And essentially what took place in that instance, they blew the money because they didn't know how to handle it. Nor were they willing to have anybody say, you know, it's a foolish idea for you to buy in the 1980s a $12,000 car because the insurance is going to be expensive for you. So towards that end, the age of 18 doesn't mean that it's the age of responsibility. And you got to remember that. And what you implant in your children today and how they handle money is very, very important. And you can think about this in your own particular instance. In our instance, both of our sons do very well at handling money. And Dawn and I, for years, worked together, and she does all the books in our house, but we understand really how to handle money. And because of the occupation I've been in for the last years, that's helped tremendously as well. So even if you have grandchildren, even if you've got nieces and nephews, speaking into their lives about using money wisely and what to do with it becomes critically important. Any questions about anything that I've said so far? Okay, so let's go on and let's talk about, yes.
Just to clarify, the interstate and intestacy is the role of the government.
Yep.
At the point of death and all that. Okay.
If you don't have a will or a trust.
The charity gift annuity, the other one was a grunt or a gap?
A CRAT. It's just the difference between the two is one you invest in a annuity, the other could be your American funds, mutual funds, or a brokerage account. Okay. All right? And the charity that you give those to will give you an income, and then they get to keep part of it when you actually pass away, a retain amount. It's a good planning tool to get beyond capital gains tax. Good question. Okay, let's talk about wills and probate. What does everybody think when I say the word probate? Problems? Okay.
Loss of control.
Loss of control. All right? Well, let me tell you why you've got that message over the years. That message, have you ever been invited to a seminar, a free seminar where they bought you dinner and they started talking about a irrevocable living trust? They're still prevalent in the area, and I get them in the mail all the time, and they say, we'll buy you and your spouse dinner if you'll come listen to us talk about why a trust is so important and the horrors of probate. All right? The definition of probate is we're going to allow everybody to get together and fight over your assets. All right? That's really not the definition, but that's how they make it sound. What's the difference between the cost of a will and a trust? Anybody know? And by the way, you'll have both when you get the trust, because of the fact that if you forget to register things in the name of the trust, it's going to pour over into the will when you die. And that's a catch-all. And so there are some things that you really need to be aware of when you establish that trust. And it's important. So probate is really not as bad as it sounds. It was these firms that gave probate a bad name because they wanted to sell trusts. And the cost between a good trust and a complex will is somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000 to $5,000. All right? Now, I'm not saying that people in here don't need a trust. All right? What I'm saying is you really need to analyze in this case whether or not you need one by getting good counsel from an attorney. And I'll give you some examples. If you own a business, you probably need a trust. If you own a lot of property in other states, you may need a trust. If you have a complex situation brought on by divorce or some type of disillusionment of a business, you might need a trust. But the thing that I want to impress on all of you, that getting good counsel from people that are knowledge, that are not out trying to make extra dollars by just selling you one thing, is important. And I'll give you some names of people that will do that for you. So, let's talk about wills. What's the first type of will you can have? Simple? It's even simpler than that. It's called a holographic will. And there's something that's very important. There's two things that are very important to have on your holographic will. The first, in this instance, a holographic will is a handwritten will. It has to be legible. That's one of the first criteria. And you know what most wills and trusts start with? I, being of sound mind and body. And that's a decision that's going to be made by a lot of people. Especially the person that you leave out of your holographic will. They're going to be talking to you about it, all right? Or they're going to be talking to your executor or executrix or your administrator of your will. In the state of Oregon, a holographic will is not legal unless it's notarized. We probably have a notary public in the room someplace. Okay. What's the purpose of the notary public, Bill?
Make sure that you review.
That's right. And that you're competent to sign what you're signing. It's also wise to have 2 or 3 witnesses on your holographic will. So, when you go in, if you remember signing your will, when you went in, what took place? That was notarized. I was walking by a legal office here not too long ago, and all of a sudden here come the attorneys that I know. Kelly, we need you. could you come witness this for us? So I went back in, and I actually knew the people, and I told them that they should go get a will. So I witnessed the will that they were drawing up. So those are critical. Now the other thing that takes place is, how often should you look at your holographic will? Often. Anytime there's a family change, maybe there's a grandson that's in rehab, maybe there's a granddaughter that has said, I don't want anything to do with my family anymore, and I'm going to run off with this guy, and he's got a questionable past, but he loves me and I'm going. So how often? Anytime there is a life change. When somebody in the family passes away that is very key to the family. So you look at that. So if you're going to have a holographic will, and you can write one, make sure that we can read your writing, make sure that it's witnessed, make sure there's a notary public on it, and then it will probably be honored in the state of Oregon, but it could be contested. And that's the issue that you have with holographic wills. Well, how do we really know? And it's also subject to somebody coming in and saying, Dad, you really didn't mean that. I want more because you gave him this $2,000 for that Camaro he bought back when he was in high school. And so you have this constant pressure in this instance. So make sure in this instance you go that direction. The next thing, you can go on your computer and you can find offers for wills in this case, if in fact, and this is on the back of the page, if in fact you want to do that. It says who gets what, including minor kids, who your executor is going to be. Simple wills are very good for single people. However, if you do have children as a single person, one of the things that is important here is that you, in this case, say who the guardian is going to be for those minor children and who is going to control the money, because we don't want it to go into a conservatorship. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. So remember, the simple will is something that's very important. And I'll give you another criteria here. Everybody gets frightened about estate taxes. When I first started in my career over 40 years ago, if you had $1 million, you had to file a federal estate tax return. That has now climbed to $11.5 million. And there's ways in this instance that you can mitigate estate taxes through the use of a lot of legal documents, and I won't go into those. But for the most part, one of the things that you can do is give money away. But there's limitations on giving money away for a federal basis. But there isn't for a state basis.
Well, that's where I got that $2 million.
Yeah.
I had a friend.
Yeah. Did he file the gift tax return? Did he? And so we'll.
If he does it, then it's your responsibility.
Yeah. You have to go after it. And so, you know, as far as estate taxes go, it's seldom that you run into huge problems with federal estate tax. But one of the things that is being proposed and talked about, and you've heard me talk about this in class, is what's called step up in basis. And we'll go into that here in the near future, and I'll give you a better example of that. But the best way to get beyond step up in basis problems is to die. I know that's not a good criteria, but that's the best way to do it, okay? You get to go home, but you're going to leave some problems here for your family. So those simple wills are easy to get, and you can go on the computer and buy one. They might charge you $45. I saw a full-blown trust advertised for $99, but I didn't get down to, well, if you want this, it'll be an extra $400, and you want this, it'll be an extra $400, or whatever. So go spend some time. Take a look at those on the computer. So let's go into the complex wills talk. Now, every single will that you get should have attached to it something called a durable power of attorney, a DPA. In fact, for a lot of older single people that have lost their husbands, I sometimes, hey, let's get this done today. And you can go online and buy one for $4. It's a single sheet of paper, and what it does is it gives power to somebody to take care of your financial situation if you're not able to. If you have some sort of organic disease that you can't communicate, you're in a coma, etc., that durable power of attorney becomes very important. But you have to understand that it passes when you pass. It's no longer viable when you pass. Then that crosses over into the administrator of your estate. So the durable power of attorney, everybody in this room, except maybe some of the younger ones in this room, needs a durable power of attorney. And who do you share that with? Who's going to become your durable power of attorney? It's your spouse, unless you're hiding something from them. But it's your spouse, in this case, that will become the durable power of attorney for you. And then you should name a secondary if they are unwilling or unable to serve. So make sure that's included. Okay, so let's go into the complex wills. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about what we call a testamentary trust. The testamentary trust, in this case, is one that comes into effect when you pass away. And I'm going to use myself and Dawn as an example. We were going on a trip somewhere years ago, and I just got done with an estate planning class in someplace, I can't remember where it was, one of my studies. They talked about this issue of, the conservatorship and guardianship. And so we talked about that at length and decided that, well, my parents are too old, her parents were too old to take on two very energetic boys. So we determined that the people that would become the guardians for our children were some people by the name of Frasers, which were good friends of ours that live in Hermiston. Now, one of the cool things that you need to do, and it's absolutely an important thing to do, is if you name somebody to be the guardian of your children, you ought to tell them about it. Okay? You need to get their approval. It's important. So we did that, at least. Then, what we decided is, well, what will we do with our house? Well, the house would be paid for because of insurance. And so the house was to be sold. And the proceeds of the house was going to go to the Frasers to add on to their house to take care of two more boys. The monies were going to be held in trust for them because I did not want the guardian in this particular case to have the responsibility to take care of our kids, but also have to step out here and manage a $500,000 or $600,000 estate for the benefit of the children. So we went into the trust in depth and said, all right, what we're going to do, you get all their Social Security benefits, and you can apply to the trust to get needed monies, in this case, for our children's education or upbringing. Now, this didn't stop until our children were the ages of 28, the youngest one at 28, because we specified also in this testamentary trust that they'd get money to go to college, but it was only based on them going to college on a term-by-term basis. There's no mention of new cars in there or any mention of anything else, but essentially what we were trying to do is we were trying to reach up from the grave and manage their behavior. And there's nothing wrong with that. When that's done, you give the children a chance, in this case, to grow into the monies and the responsibility of the monies. And think about this. Think about grandchildren that you might influence with this method, etc., etc. And grandparents can leave the monies in a testamentary trust to children. But if they're under the age of 18, the testamentary trust is going to take care of the problem of the bureaucracy in the form of conservatorships and guardianship. The last money would have come out to our two sons at their age of 28, and hopefully by that time it was taken care of. Now, here comes the next thing. I didn't want Steve and Chris Frazier to be responsible for this money and the kids. So I named, at the time, I believe, U.S. Bank as the trustee of this money. And they would, by the terms of our will, decide how that money was going to be paid out. And so we have this entity now taking care of the money, and we have the people that we want that have agreed to it to take care of our kids. Some years ago, Dawn was talking to our youngest friend, our youngest son, and she looked at Lee and she says, "Hey Lee, do you know where you're going if you die?" He says, "Yeah, Frazier's." I said, "No, Lee, no. You got to remember, Mom is talking about this." So, and now there's all sorts of trust entities out there that you can use. You can use your bank. Most major banks have a trust department that will do this. There's also a very good firm in the Tri-Cities called Northern Trust that could help in this instance with that position. They're in the Tri-Cities, they're also in Spokane, but most banks in this instance can do that. So, that gives us the assurance that we're not going to run into this problem up, all right? It worked out that we didn't have to use it, and that trust is no longer in effect because they're over the age of 28. All right. Other things that you might suspect would be in a complex will. Any ideas?
You can leave money to like a church or a missionary organization.
Exactly. And you can do that through trust as well. The other aspects of it is one of the things that I like to see in a will or with the will papers is what we call an advance directive. And I know where you can get these for a great price. They're free. Maria can help you get one. And essentially what an advance directive does, it allows the people around you to know what's going to take place if you get to the point where you no longer are expected to live. Included with that might be something in this instance we would call a DNR, the do not resuscitate. And we've seen this take place. There might be something in there called an ILIT, which is called an Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust. And why would that be important? Well, in the state of Oregon, the inheritance tax starts at $1 million and it's 10%, and it goes gradually up to 16%. So if you had an estate in this particular instance of $2 million in the state of Oregon, that $2 million I gave you, what you're going to do is you're going to pay the state of Oregon about $160,000 in inheritance tax. So if you own a life insurance policy and the life insurance policy is owned by you, you have that $2 million policy, and let's say that you decide, well, I want to leave a lot of money to a lot of people, and so I'm going to have $1 million life insurance policy. If you're the owner of that life insurance policy, that's added on top of the $2 million. What takes place is if you have what's called an ILIT, an Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust, is those monies in this particular instance are held outside of your estate, and they can be used to pay any type of inheritance tax, etc., etc. But it's a complicated instrument, and they're expensive to maintain. But it is the cheapest way to pay inheritance tax if you have to pay inheritance tax. So let's talk now, we got just a few minutes left, and passing assets outside of probate. I want to talk to you quickly about two things in this instance that are called Totten Trust. And you spell that T-O-T-T-E-N. A Totten Trust is also called a POD or a TOD, a transfer on death or payable on death. So you can register your brokerage account, you can register your savings account at the bank under a TOD or a POD. All right? And that's payable on death. That bypasses probate. Yes?
What about Conservatorship? Is that the same thing or similar?
It's similar, but it's not as good. The TOD and the POD are better. All right? Now, what do you have to be aware of? Who's going to be the POD? All right? Or the TOD? Most banks will only give you the POD, payable on death. Transfer on death can be done with checking accounts, savings accounts. I've got one I'm working on right now that's got over $1 million in it, and it's to 5 children. And it's a TOD. Payable on death means they're just going to pay the money out. You may not want that. All right? Transfer on death means they're going to transfer it into their names, and they have to go talk to an advisor before they can get the money out. And that's a better situation in our opinion. It gives the advisor the chance to counsel them how this money should be used. All right? But again, you also have to go back to whether or not they're old enough to get the money. Remember that. That's always critical in this. Are you old enough to get the money? If not, they're going to have to go into what? Conservatorship. So both of those are important. Now, we've got about 5 minutes left. And are there any questions about anything that I've said today? Okay, so let's talk a little bit. Let me give you a quick case study. And a lot of you knew my parents. They lived here in Stanfield for years. When my father died, over 21 years ago, it was Mom, and she had a nice farm that was out by Larry and Lorraine's. And after about a year, she understood she couldn't live there anymore, so she sold it and moved into a house right next to us. And so her total estate was somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000 when she passed away. And she had been in a long-term care facility for 3 years prior to her passing. So one of the things that when she went in, she had a bunch of monies in her IRAs. And where do you think that we paid for her stay in the long-term care facility? From her IRAs. Because their accountant said, hey, that's totally tax deductible for her care. So about $3,500 a month, plus her Social Security and some small retirements, went for her care in that long-term care facility. When she died, there was still money left in her IRAs, which was split amongst 5 people. Her 2 children and her 3 grandchildren. And that was done via a beneficiary exchange. And so when the kids got about $15,000, $16,000 apiece, they had to pay tax on that money, or I gave them, say, hey, let's do a tax wash. you up your 401k deposits, you'll get $15,000 taxable, but you'll get a $15,000 deductible. The rest was transferred POD or TOD. Except for one last thing. I almost got stuck on this one. When a person dies, if they have a Medicare supplement, what happens? The insurance company will return a portion of that wasn't used for that month. So I got the check from Blue Cross payable to the estate of my mother, which would have said that I have to file now a small estate affidavit. And if you have less than $200,000 in a home and less than $80,000 in cash or goods, you can file a small estate affidavit, which costs $186. You get it offline, you file it, and you're done. Well, I got a check paid to the estate of Virginia Bissinger for $86. It's going to cost me $186 to file a small estate affidavit. So I called Blue Cross and I begged. And they sent me a check for the $86 of the unused. And we closed the estate in a matter of months. Because, you know, it was very simple. I had everything done probably in 30 days except filing her last year's income taxes. And she wouldn't allow me to file income taxes for 3 years because she didn't understand. She kept saying, no, don't do it, don't do it. And finally, after she passed away, I went against her wishes and took it to Barnett and Morrow, and we filed the last 3 years, just to make sure that I wasn't going to have any problems with it. So, and she had a trust, but most everything was taken care of with just that simple process of beneficiaries, TODs, and PODs. All right, and I've got through everything. Any questions? And by all means, ask questions, and I'll try and impart. I've given you a lot of information today. Is it too much?
So Kelly, if your kids are over 28, is the trust still a good thing to have?
Could be. Depends on your children's financial situation and how they treat money. It could be, yes. It just depends. Family situations are totally different. You get into some of the larger estates where there's 10 kids or 15 kids or grandchildren, and you've got 2 that want to cause problems. There's all sorts of things. Divorces create huge problems. There's so many different things in this that you need to consider. And that really depends on how you feel about it, and working with a good attorney or advisor and saying, hey. And again, I want to tell all of you that I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant, but in just the process over the years of working with them is allowing me to speak to you in the manner that I am today. And what I'm telling you today could be wrong because it could have changed 2 months ago and I didn't hear about it. That's how fast things change. All right? Yes?
You mentioned you had some references, names.
Sure. If I'm doing just simple will or complex wills, Ben Dixon and Hermiston do a good job. Sally Hansel in Hermiston does a good job with trust and complex wills. If we get into a situation for planning where somebody is having Alzheimer's problems, I use a firm out of Portland called Ney and Friedenberg, and this gentleman's about 76 years old, and he does a great job with this and has saved numerous clients lots and lots of money because of his development of these long-term care trusts that he does. Ray, would you close us in prayer?